would be in the land of Israel. Unlike England, which went to war in India and fought all over the world to have an empire, and the United States would be over the world fighting, and evil countries, Russia and China, they go all over the world to fight. We're just in one country, the land of Israel, as a Jewish people, that is, and that's the only place we would be fighting, whether to defend or otherwise. And therefore, all these halachot, all the laws we were learning about going to war and the ethics and values stem from and tie in with Eretz Yisrael. So our last two classes, and this one, we first of all will finish that unit and then go forward with Rambam. Our last two classes we've been talking about the centrality of Eretz Yisrael, and to get a feel that it's not just politics. Like for someone to get up and say, I'm a Canadian and I'm a proud Canadian, or I'm French and I'm, Vive la France, or whatever it might be, Deutschland, and you have all these nationalities. Here we're talking about something far deeper than simply the nationality of like nationalism or patriotism. We're talking about religion. This actually comes under our religion, the land of Israel. That's why when people talk about, oh, I'm not anti-Zionist, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-Zionist. You can't be anti-Zionist without being anti-Jewish. That's like, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-kosher. I'm against kosher slaughter for other people. You don't want to eat kosher yourself, that's your business. But you try to legislate to prevent people from slaughtering kosher. I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-kosher slaughter. You're anti-Jewish. That's what's motivating you. In San Francisco, they tried a few years ago, and Santa Monica, to ban circumcision in California. It was a bunch of gay groups, and you could kind of connect the dots and figure that out. And they tried to ban circumcision, bris. Oh, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-circumcision. Well, these are defining aspects of Judaism. You can't be anti-one without being anti-Jewish. And if you'll find me some Jew who says, well, I'm Jewish, right? Bernie Sanders, don't give Israel a nickel. And it's good that Netanyahu is being persecuted by the International Criminal Court. And that's Sanders. Well, he's what we call an apostate. We've always had those. And that's a good class for itself. Not for our Thursday night class, but that's a really good class for itself. Why we have a certain number of emotionally sick Jews who actually feel compelled to be anti-Jewish. And it's a thing. You don't find it among Blacks, Hispanics. You really don't find it among other people, like Italians. Even when you had Irish fighting other Irish, it was over Protestantism versus Catholicism. But the idea of being hateful to your own people is a unique Jewish thing, and it stems from a lot of psychological and emotional, really mental illness. Not classic mental illness, but it's they need therapy. They want to fit in, and they know they can't fit in because they're Jewish. They can't do anything about it. They can't just decide at age 70. Bernie Sanders can't come at age 70 and say, I'm running for president and don't look upon me as Jewish. So he's got to show he's more anti-Israel than anyone else. That way they'll believe he's not so Jewish, so Zionist. It's a sickness. Why does Chuck Schumer, he would never get up as the Senate majority leader and say that Russia should have new elections, Ireland should have new elections, France should have new elections, because he's got to show, I'm not so Jewish. He can't suddenly come out and say, after having spent his entire career trying to get votes in Brooklyn as a Jew, suddenly to say he's not Jewish. And it's not cool to suddenly be openly saying, well, I'm dropping out of my people. So he says, I am Jewish. I just don't like their prime minister, and everything they're doing is wrong, and they need to have new elections. And he's certainly focused on that. And he still hasn't yet signed the invitation that Mike Johnson wants to send to bring the prime minister here. So we have to understand that Israel actually, and Zionism, is part of being Jewish. It comes with the bris, it comes with the kosher, it comes with the Shabbos. Shabbat, Kashrut. So we first of all will finish the unit, this subsection on the love of the land and the degree to which it's more than politics, but the rabbis of the Talmud manifested their love of the land. So we're not talking about politicians vying for votes by saying, I'm more pro-Israel. We're not talking about the Likud, which is a nationalist party, but not necessarily a religiously based party. Many of their members are there because they're religiously motivated, and many others are utterly non-religious. And yet they're very that's a nationalistic thing. And, better to have that than to be anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist. But we're talking about a religiously based love of the land of Israel. Let's take a look in the halakhic text. Thank you, of course, for being here. We always make that point very important to say because it's so true. We're back in the Gemara. Mesekhet Ketubot, Tractate Ketubot. It's at the very, very end of the Tractate. Folio 112a, Daf Kufyud Bet Amud Aleph. Omar Rav Chisda, Rabbi Chisda, one of the great rabbis of the Talmud. And remember, during the Talmudic period, there were two primary Torah-based communities, Babylonia and the land of Israel. Even after the Romans destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, Jews continued to have an important presence in the land of Israel. Famous rabbis like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is like 60 years after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. You still had Jews there. And so how do you know which ones are from Israel and which ones are from Babylonia? Usually if the name ends with the letter Aleph, that's an Aramaic kind of way of writing a name, implying that rabbi's Babylonia-based. Also, when he's called Rav, if it's Rav, they're usually from Babylonia. If they're from Israel, it's normally Rabbi, as in Rabbi Akiva. When you talk about Rabbi Akiva, nobody ever talks about Rav Akiva. Rabbi, because it's Israel. And so Rav, Babylonia, Chisda, with an Aleph at the end, Babylonia. So Rav Chisda of Babylonia said, Ma'itachtiv, what is the meaning? And this is the way we learn, the way the Talmud speaks, is that when a rabbi is going to teach something, he first asks the question that his teaching will answer. Instead of just coming straight out and teaching something, he asks a question and then he gives an answer. That's the style. What does it mean when it says in the book of Jeremiah, V'aten lach eretz chemda nachalat tzvi? God says in the book of Yirmiyahu, and I shall give you a beloved land, chemda, a beloved land, nachalat tzvi, the inheritance, a land like a deer, D-E-E-R, a land like a deer. Lama Eretz Yisrael nimshala litzvi. So Rav Chisda says, why does why did Jeremiah compare Israel to a deer? Let's look at that pasuk a moment, just since we're talking about it anyway. We're talking about pasuk 19. Let's put up the Hebrew with the English if we can. I guess unless they don't have the Hebrew. Yeah, okay, I think they'll have both. Okay, so let's take a look at it. We just bring this person in. Okay. Va'anochi amarti ech ashitech babanim. And Yirmiyah is talking in the name of God as his prophet, that God wants to, quote unquote, adopt us, the Jewish people. Ve'etein lach eretz chemda. And I want to give you, that is God, I want to give you a beloved land, nachalat tzvi, a land like a deer, D-E-R, Sivot Goyim, the most beautiful land among all the nations. And so we see that the land of Israel is compared to a deer. See if they translate that one. They left it out, but anybody who knows Hebrew knows that Tzvi is a deer. Okay. So let's go back to the Gemara. Let's just take that off the plate. Okay. So what is the meaning that the land is compared to a deer? Why is Eretz Yisrael likened to a deer, a tzvi? And by the way, just a real quick aside, for those Ashkenazim who have names that have some Yiddish in it, it was very common in the naming of Ashkenazic Jews. You'd give the person a Hebrew name, and his middle name or her middle name would be the Yiddish translation. My name is Dov Bear. A dove is the Hebrew word for a bear, B-E-A-R. And my name is Dov Bear, Bet Ayin Resh. Menachem Mendel. Menachem is a comforter, as is Mendel, one who comforts, like when Mashiach will come at Tisha B'Av becomes a holiday. Arya Leib. Arya is a lion. Leib is the Yiddish word because the lion was the strongest hearted of all the animals. It's also in Yiddish called a Leib, Arya Leib. In the same way, you may encounter someone whose name is Tzvi Hertz. And if you ever meet, or Tzvi Hirsch, if you ever meet someone like that, Hirsch or Hertz is a heart, H-A-R-T, a form of the family of deers, or deer, plural. So again, I'm just mentioning that since we're talking about Tzvi. So, okay, we continue now. So the Gemara is asking, Rav Chisda is asking, why is the land of Israel compared to a deer? Let's just take that off the screen. Okay. Lomar lacha, and the reason is to tell you, ma tzvi ze ein oro machazik b'saro. A deer, when it gets prepared to be eaten, so they skin the deer and they have the meat. Let's say you were to take that meat after skinning the deer and try to wrap that meat again in the skin. But once you've skinned it, the skin shrinks. It's no longer stretched out over all the meat. So just as with a deer, its skin does not, machazik b'saro, does not fully encompass all of its meat once it's skinned off. Af Eretz Yisrael and amachzeket peiroteha. It's a blessing. In the same way, the land of Israel is like that skin that somehow it can't keep up with holding all of the fruit and vegetables that will grow on its surface. That God is so going to bless the land of Israel, it will be so fruitful with fruit and also vegetables that you'll see how it started. And if you take off the skin, so to speak, it'll keep increasing so much you won't be able to wrap it back up with the same skin. And indeed, we've seen this since 1948. And even before, when the Jews came back to the Negev, for example, which had been fallow for how many hundreds of years, thousands of years. And the Turks couldn't make it grow, and the Arabs couldn't make it grow. No one was able to make it grow. And the Jews came back, and it became a fertile paradise. Even the Negev, whose very name implies dry, D-R-Y. L'nagev is to dry your hands. A magevet is a towel. It's called a Negev because it's a desert with sun and it's dry, but they made it bloom. So just as a deer skin cannot wrap the meat of the deer after it's taken off, land of Israel, the fruit grows so fast, you can't keep up with it, can't wrap it again. Davar acher, and another reason, or another interpretation why God compares the land of Israel to a deer, matzvi zakal mincho chayot. Just as a deer is the fastest of all animals, af Eretz Yisrael kala mikol ha'aratzot levashel peiroteha. Similarly, the land of Israel is faster than any other land in terms of its fruit blossoming, its ground blossoming. It grows faster. It's blessed in a unique way. Eretz Tzvi. And again, we've seen this most famously in the Negev, but it's known in general. I mean, when they went and they've done things in agriculture in the Negev, frankly, when they went into Gaza and they created cherry tomatoes, that was the Jews in Gaza actually first came up with cherry tomatoes, those little tomatoes everybody eats now. They went into Gaza, and you've seen forget about war, you've seen what the Arabs did to Gaza. Before Sharon made that terrible decision to give Gaza to the Arabs, when there were Jews in Gaza, Gush Katif, other such places, they made it, and we've seen it on our Sunday program when I've shown clips, they made the place blossom. It was a paradise. That's why, as bad as Gaza is vis-a-vis the Arab Muslims, the Jews were unbelievable. The Jews living in Gaza didn't want to leave. And they cried. And I've shown you clips on Sundays that they cried. They didn't want to give up the land. They made a paradise there, even though they were surrounded by all these Arabs that were trying to kill them. And so that's the uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, I prepared for you, many of you may recognize this melody from our Sunday class, although it's normally sung with different lyrics. But it was initially written, this song was initially written for the movie of Operation Jonathan, Mivtza Yonatan, when Israel went into Entebbe and freed all the hostages that under Idi Amin and the Arabs and the Germans that work with them, they took Jews hostage. You remember what they did in Entebbe, and then the Israelis, to the shock of the entire world, from Israel all the way into Entebbe, into Uganda, and liberated everybody. And the only one who died, ironically and tragically, was the commander of the operation. All the soldiers got back, everybody got back, all the hostages got back. Only Jonathan Yonatan Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu's brother, was the only one who died. So it's known as Operation Jonathan. And they then made a movie, like the first movie about the raid on Entebbe was not the English language movies, but an Israeli movie. And it was in Hebrew. And as with all movies, you have somebody writes the music, the score, and they have a theme to the movie. And then at the Academy Awards, they give an award for the best movie theme. And the theme of that movie was Land of Deer, Eretz Tzvi, based on that Gemara I just taught you right now. Why is it called the Land of Deer? Because its fruit grows so much that the land itself practically can't hold it, and it grows so fast like a deer. I'm going to share this with you.
בחצי הלילה הם קמו והיכו בקצה העולם כבני רשף חשו הרחיקו להשיב את כבוד האדם אל ארץ צבי, אל דבש שדותיה, אל הכרמל והמדבר, אל עם אשר לא יחשב, שאת בניו לא יפקיר לזר, אל ארץ צבי שבהריה פועמת עיר מדור לדור, אל ארץ אם לטבורה קשורים בניה בטוב וברע. בחצי הלילה עוברת בשדות בארצותינו רוח שרב, ערבה אילמת, הרכין אז ראש, על אשר ישחר לא שב, אל ארץ צבי, אל דבש שדותיה, אל הכרמל והמדבר, אל עם אשר לא יחשב, שאת בניו לא יפקיר לזר, אל ארץ צבי שדמעותיה נושרות על שדה חמניות, שיצפונה וששונה הם שטיפה ערב בבגד יומה.
I wanted to share that with you if you had never heard it before. Let's go back to the learning now. It's a very important part of our culture and our history that it is a land that will not forsake her sons to any foreign nation. And that's why they went to the other side of the world to liberate the hostages from Entebbe. And that's why they're doing everything they can now to liberate people from Gaza, even those who were killed by the Arabs in Gaza, even to bring their bodies home, not to leave anyone in Eretz Zar, in a foreign land. So we continue talking about the love of the land of Israel. It continues. Rabbi Elazar. Oh, well, we'll skip that one. It takes too much explaining. Here we go. Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi means he's from Israel, but Zera ends in an aleph, Babylonia, so somewhere in between. Rabbi Zera, ki hava salik Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Zera, we're being told now, he was basically based in Babylonia. He was Babylonian Jew, and he wanted to go up to be set foot in the land of Israel. La ashkach mabarale mebar. In order to get from Babylonia to Israel, you couldn't take an airplane in those days. You had to find some kind of a ferry or a boat or a ship, and he couldn't find one. Nakat b'mitzravika avar. So he had gone from Babylonia, he'd gotten close, but hadn't been able to get across, I guess maybe the Jordan River, the last step. I'm not sure which body of water, but since he couldn't get a ferry, it says that he somehow grabbed onto some kind of rope that was hanging from something, and he swung himself with the rope across the body of water so he could set foot in Israel. Omarle Pahut Saduke. I don't want to get into a long thing now about the Sadducees, but basically a cynical Jew, think of Bernie Sanders, if he could talk Hebrew, speak Hebrew. So anyway, the Sadducee saw this happening and said, Amma Beziza, you people are in such a rush. You don't pause to think that you're in such a rush. Tekadmitu bumaichu leudnaichu. When God had you at Mount Sinai to declare the 10 pronouncements or declarations, what the non-Jewish world calls the 10 Commandments, and the whole nation said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Before we even hear what your laws are, we undertake to do them. Na'aseh, we'll do them. V'nishma, okay, now that we made the commitment, let's hear what we got ourselves into. Now we're willing to listen. So the Tzadduki is saying, you hasty people, such a rush that pumaichu, your mouths spoke or got started before udnaichu, The Daled in Aramaic is like a Zion in Hebrew, like Oznechem. Your mouths started before your ears. With your mouths, you said you're going to do before your ears even heard what you're going to hear, nishma. So look what a rush you're in. Achati bifsi zaichu kaimaitu. Are you in such a rush you can't wait for the next boat? You have to grab onto this rope to get onto the shore? What's your rush? Amar le Rabbi Zera responded, Duchta de Moshe v'Aaron lo zachule. This land, this place that Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen, his brother, Moshe and Aaron, never merited setting foot on, right? They led the Jews 40 years in the desert, but Hashem did not let them come across into the land. This land that Moshe and Aaron did not merit coming into, Ana miyemar desachinale. Well, I'm certainly no Moshe or Aaron. Who's to say that I'll ever have a chance to get into the land? So yeah, I'm in a rush. I want to get in the land while I'm still alive. Who knows what'll happen in 5 minutes? That's the depth of the love for the land of Israel. I will tell you, it's hard to talk about it, so I'll try to be quick before I start crying. But when my beloved wife, Ellen Zichrona Livracha, was coming towards the later part of her illness of cancer, it became a mega priority of mine. I've got to get her again into the land of Israel. And there were a number of reasons that it was not the best time in my calendar, and that was not the year for that. But there was no way to know what's going to be coming. And I also had been diagnosed with the interstitial lung disease. And I just decided, I don't care what, we're going. And I told Ellen, Zichrona Livracha, and we went, and we had the most great time. It was that kind of a love for the land of Israel. Had it been a couple intending to travel to Europe to visit some of our favorite countries like Spain and Norway and Ireland, who cares? Who cares? Seriously, who cares? But the land of Israel, it could wait. We couldn't wait. And that's the kind of love we all have for the land. And you can't explain this to other people exactly, because at best, they relate to their own nationalistic, patriotic feelings. They can't imagine the theological dimension. And what is that? What is that theological dimension? Rabbi Abba, Menashek Kefe de Akko. Now, Accra, or Akko, is located up north in the land of Israel. So you have, let's see if I can find it marked off on any of these maps. If not, it's in the northern part of Israel. And okay, I don't have the city specifically marked off, but it's in northern Israel. And he would go and he would kiss the rocks. Can you imagine? Kiss the rocks, bend down, pick up rocks, and kiss the rocks in the city of Akko. Again, many of you probably have seen, I wouldn't be surprised, either you've seen it one time or another on a newsreel, a YouTube clip, maybe you did it yourself. People coming off the airplane when it lands in Ben Gurion Airport, and they touch the ground and they kiss the tarmac. You ever seen that? They kiss the tarmac. Nobody French arrives in Paris or wherever their airports are, and Orly Airport, kiss the tarmac, or British at Heathrow. People don't do that. It doesn't make any sense to people. That's the love that we have for the land of Israel, and that's where it comes from. So if the great rabbis of the Talmud would pick up rocks and stones and kiss them, so we have that tradition. That's where it comes from. Not that somebody just made it up. And likewise, as we continue with these other examples, Rabbi Abba Menashe Kefa Diaka. Rabbi Abba would kiss the stones of Akko. Rabbi Chanina Metakein Matkalaya. Rabbi Chanina, if he would see like potholes, little cracks in the road, he would, as great a rabbi as he was, he's quoted all over the Talmud, he would change his day's activities to bring whatever sand or whatever he brought to smooth out the road, that it shouldn't be that there are potholes in the land of Israel. Rabbi Ame for Rabbi Asi, and these two rabbis, folio B, Amud Bet, kaime mishimsha letula umitula l'shimsha. If they were sitting under the shemesh, if they were somewhere in Israel, in an area that was not shady, and it was getting hot, they would make it their business to go to somewhere that's shady. And if there was somewhere shady where it was a little bit windy or a little cool, they'd go out in the sun. Not because simply that it's a little more comfortable, but because it was important for them that a Jew should never feel uncomfortable in the land of Israel. If we're in Israel, we shouldn't feel sweaty hot. We shouldn't feel shivering. And so they would make that symbolic gesture to be as comfortable as could be. Now, obviously, Tel Aviv in the middle of summer is quite hot. And it's something that all the countries who have kept their embassies in Tel Aviv, they all deserve that. Versus the countries that moved to Jerusalem, where it's a summer, it's a machaya. It's wonderful. But these rabbis wanted it never to be that there would be a place in Israel where they would feel uncomfortable. Rabbi Chia bar Gamada, Migandar Ba'afra. And this rabbi, a different Rabbi Chia, made it his business. He would roll in the sand, not like on a beach only, but he would roll on the sand of Israel, get the sand on him. Shneimar kiratzu avadecha et avaneha bet afara yechonenu. As it says in Tehillim. It says in Tehillim, kiratzu avadecha et avaneha, for your servants love her rocks, her stones, and they cherish her afar, her dust. That's the love of the land of Israel. So we come back to the Rambam now and our discussion of this subject of Israel and everything like that, and going to war. So we continue. First, the very end of the chapter we were doing last 2 weeks, chapter 5 of Hilkhot Malachim Milchamot. Amru Chachamim kol hashochen be'Eretz Yisrael avonotav mechulin. The rabbis taught anyone who lives in the land of Israel, his sins are forgiven. Now let's understand, a person goes land of Israel and commits, God forbid, a murder or a holdup. It's not so simple. It's not like you have a get out of jail free card. It's not like everything, but all things being equal, a decent person who has done certain things wrong, I mean, that's what Yom Kippur is about. Asking God, please forgive us for our sins. Slachna. Well, if you live in the land of Israel, every day is like Yom Kippur for gaining kapara, atonement, without having to starve. And you could still wear leather shoes on those other days, other than Yom Kippur. So one who lives in the land of Israel, his sins are forgiven, Shneimar, as it says in Isaiah, in Yeshayahu. Let's see, 33:24. So it says, let's get that Hebrew back up also. Okay. So it says, Uval yomar shechen chaliti ha'am yoshev ba neso avon. No one who lives there shall say, I am sick. It shall be inhabited by folks whose sin has been forgiven. So citing that, the rabbis learned that as per Yeshayahu's, Isaiah's prophecy, the land forgives sin. And now you begin understanding also why people get buried in the land of Israel, even if they don't live there. And we talked about that last week also. Afilu halachba arba amot, sochel lechayei ha'olam haba. Even if a person walks only 4 cubits, a cubit is like between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. So call it 6 to 8 feet. Even if a person walks only 6 to 8 feet in the land of Israel, he or she merits a portion in the world to come. Obviously, if you live a righteous life, it's a much, much greater portion, obviously. But there's a place for being in the land of Israel. It is that holy. And again, this is not only nationalism. You won't hear even the most patriotic, Alon Zinfant de la Patrie, you won't hear French people going around, well, if you walk 6 feet in France, you're going to get a place in the world to come. Nobody thinks like that. The Brits, nobody. You love your country, you love your country. But with Israel, it's a religious dimension. And that's why you even find people like some of these so-called anti-Zionist Hasidic groups, like those insane nuts from the Torah Carta or whatever. So then why don't they leave Israel? Because it's the land of Israel. And they know it's God's land. And they know what the Talmud teaches. V'chen hakavur ba nitkaper lo. And one who is buried in the land. We learned it last week. I mentioned that Ellen Zichrono Livracha and I have 2 grave sites side by side near Beit Shemesh in the cemetery, the Rabbinical Council of America section. And I talked about it last week that many of the different groups have sections, and perhaps we all know someone who has been buried in Israel. V'chein hakavur ba niskaper lo. It's like if you're buried in the land of Israel, you are forgiven for your sins. Uche'ilu hamakom shehu bo mizbach kapara. It's as though the land of Israel is an altar for forgiveness. Shneimar, as it says in the Torah. Harninu go'im amo, kidam avadav yikom. On the one hand, O nations, you better pay homage to God and to his people, because he will avenge the blood of his servants. V'nakam yashiv l'tzarav, v'chiper admato amo, and his adamah, his land, will atone amo for his nation, and his a better term, v'chiper admato amo, and his land will gain forgiveness and atonement for his people. And that's why being buried in the land of Israel is special and is religiously special. Uvapur anut hu omer al adama teme'at tamut. And on the other hand, the prophet Amos, he refers to that as a punishment, a person will die in a impure land, a land outside of Israel. Thus, I swear, is what God said, says Amos. Your wife and all of that, he's warning your sons and daughters shall fall by the sword. It's obviously a prophecy for their sins, that bad times will come if they don't change. And your land shall be divided up with a measuring line. Other nations will come and take it. And like the worst of punishments, you yourself shall die on impure soil. For Israel shall be exiled from its soil. That is to say, as part of God's punishment, atah, with an aleph, al adamat me'at tamut, a punishment to die on foreign land and to be exiled from your own land. Thus, the centrality of the land of Israel. And last sentence on this, ve'eno domeh kolatato mechaim lekolatato achamoto. The Gemara and Rambam just finishes one last point on this. Even though it is so righteous to be buried in the land of Israel, and the land of Israel will atone for all your sins, even so, it's better to live in the land of Israel than merely to be absorbed in the land of Israel upon death. The afo peken gedolei hachachamim hayu molichim meitehem l'sham. But even so, even though it is better to be living in the land of Israel, it's not of the same quality as simply being buried in the land. Nevertheless, being buried in the land of Israel is a big, big thing. So much so that Gedolei HaChachamim, the Torah giants, the sages, the highest of the sages of Talmudic times, they would bring their dead, Lisham, they would bury their dead in Israel. Even if the people had died in Babylon, had lived in Babylonia until dying, they still brought them to Eretz Yisrael for burial. Hayu molichim meiteim l'sham. And Rambam concludes this with, say ulamad miYaakov Avinu v'Yosef HaTzadik. And we see this practice goes way back to the beginnings of our Jewish history. That Yaakov, our third father, Jacob, we know Abraham, we know, died and was buried in Hebron, as was Sarah. And then we know Yitzchak was buried in Hebron, Marat Machpelah, as was Rivka. And then we know Rachel died in Bethlehem, which is part of the land of Israel. Yaakov had led the family during the famine into the land of Egypt at the invitation of Yosef, his son, who had become the viceroy of Egypt. And so he ended up being there until he died at the age of 147. And so there was Yaakov who died, and on his deathbed, he left like his final tzav, his final command to his children on the deathbed, primarily to Yosef, because he knew Joseph could pull it off. He said, "Don't bury me in this land, Egypt. Bring me back to the land of my fathers and bury me in the land where I was, the land of our fathers." And of course, the Jews brought him back from Egypt to Hebron, and he was buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah in Hebron, as was Leah. And then at the end of Yosef's life, he went back, he had to go back to Egypt. The Paro would only let him leave for the purpose of burying his father. Then he's got to come back. And he lived out the rest of his life. And then when he died at 110, he also left the request, the command, "Please bury me in the land of Israel." And the Jews carried Yosef's bone, Atzmot Yosef. They carried Yosef's bones for 40 years through the desert. And we are told in other Gemaras, I didn't pull it up for you today, that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, Moses himself, insisted on the honor of carrying the bones. Not every minute, I'm sure, but on participating in carrying the bones. And there's like a whole Gemara about how God rewarded people for certain things they did. And because Moshe Rabbeinu, and one example they give is that because Moshe Rabbeinu was not so hoity-toity, but was honored to play a role in burying Yosef, therefore God Almighty rewarded him that he, God Almighty himself, would bury Moshe. As you know, Moshe went up to Har Nevo, Mount Nevo, and who buried him? He was buried by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what's told in the last chapter of the Torah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu buried him because of that. So Yosef also asked, and he's buried in Shechem, what the Arabs and others call Nablus. And just a quick word on that, and we'll go back to Rambam. As you may or may not know, there's a city in Shomron, Samaria, part of what the Arabs call the West Bank, and what they call the Palestine Authority, which one day will no longer exist. It'll just be part of Shomron, Samaria. There's a city, and Shechem, and on the maps it's called Nablus. They took away the Jewish name. So what is Nablus? Remember who expelled the Jews, who exiled the Jews, who destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, and 65 years later exiled many of the Jews, though there still were Jews left behind in the academies of Yavne, but they exiled Jews. Those were the Romans. Remember the Romans? You know how when the British came to the United States and they took New Amsterdam from the Dutch, what did they call it? They called it New York. They named it for the Duke of York. And that's a way that certain conquerors and other people name cities that they've conquered in other countries. There's a New Mexico, names like that. It's not unusual. The Romans called that city Naples, Naples, Naples. We have conquered this part of this land, the land of Israel, and we're naming it for a great Roman city, Naples. And then the Romans passed through history, and others came and passed through history, and eventually the Arabs ended up there. And as you may or may not know, Arabs from that part of the world cannot pronounce the letter P. They pronounce it like a B, like please pass me the pizza. They can't say a P. It's changed a little because now they grow up with cable television like CNN, and they hear American English pronounced. But I mean, when I was there, I was told that was one of the ways to know, like, who you're dealing with. If you get into a monit, a taxi or something, to get an idea who you're dealing with, if you hear the P pronounced like a B, that gives it away. I just mentioned how Ellen and I were in Eretz Yisrael, and right in the year 2019 or so, and we got in a cab, and the guy had a Hebrew name, and his cab, his monit on the side was called like Golan Taxi, Monit Golan. Golan sounds very Jewish. And we're in the cab and we're talking with the guy, and he's talking a very clear Hebrew. You hear that's Hebrew, not my Brooklyn Hebrew. And he's talking, and he loves Israel, and he's telling us he's against Netanyahu, but he loves Israel. But he's got this opportunity to talk to two Americans and convince two Americans that Netanyahu is bad. So he's talking about Netanyahu. He hates, and but he loves Israel. And then at one point, Ellen asks him, where is the nearest, like we were going to Machane Yehuda. We wanted to buy some fresh open market, farmer's market, fruit and vegetables. And the guy says, I'm gonna bring you here to have, he says it in English, to have the best pineapple, with a B, pineapple. That's all we needed to know. Pineapple, bye-bye. And that was, and that's the thing to know. That's how Naples became Nablus. It should really just be Shechem. Let's continue. New paragraph, new chapter, new subject with new subject. It's the same subject, but now back to fighting. The wars. So we see the centrality of the land of Israel. Ein osin milchama. You do not make a war with the enemies. Let's just get this off the screen. Okay, just give me a moment. And let me just try. Okay, let me try it this way. Eino sin milchama im adam ba'olam ad shekorin lo shalom. Jewish ethic and value of war. You are not allowed to start a war, whether a defensive war or an offensive war. You're not, and of course we're talking about in the land of Israel, unless you first offer terms of peace. It can't be simply that you just march in an expansionist war just to wipe out a country. You have to offer peace. And if they force you into a Mechemet Mitzvah, you may remember we learned about Mechemet Reshut and Mechemet Mitzvah. Mechemet Mitzvah is a God divine commanded war, either that would be against the 7 nations that are mentioned in the Torah, such as the Chivi, the Yavusi, the Girgashi, those 7 nations, or Amalek. And it also is a Mechemet Mitzvah, a Torah commanded war, if someone attacks and you're fighting someone that attacked you. Anyone who attacked, like what's going on now. You don't need a booming voice from Mount Sinai to command the Jewish people to go into Gaza and make war. After what happened on Shabbat Shmini Atzeret of October 7, that created a Milchemet Mitzvah. Not that the current Israeli government is so religious that they act based on the Rambam, but it's reassuring for those of us who are religious. This is a Milchemet Mitzvah. This is a Torah commanded, God commanded war. But anytime you go to war, you first have to offer the other side peace, which might sound like, sure, makes sense. But most countries don't do that. They count on the element of surprise, and they invade without anybody ready for it. They take them by surprise. We have to give them a warning. So that's number one. Echad Melchemet Reshut, Echad Melchemet Mitzvah. This applies whether it's an optional war, that the king wants to go and expand the borders of Israel, or a defensive war, a commanded war. You first have to give the other side Shnemar. As it says in Devarim Chav, we learned chapter 20 earlier, at the very beginning of this whole section, Ki tekravel irli lachem aleha, it's Torah commandment in chapter 20, per Chav, of Sefer Dvarim, Deuteronomy, that if you go in to make war, the karata eleha l'shalom, you first have to offer them peace. You cannot just go straight into war. So we continue. Shneimar, ki tekravel ir lilachem alav v'karata eleha l'shalom. Rambam